Are you looking for inspiring conversations about faith, film, and life? You're in the right place. Here's the host who knows the right questions to ask, Father Edward Looney.
Hey everybody, it's Father Edward. I know it's been a while since we've had an episode. May was a crazy month. It's always a crazy month for a Mariologist, with all the different things with the Blessed Mother and promoting devotion to her during her special month. But we're back at it now, and there's a lot of movies coming out in the upcoming weeks and months. And this weekend, actually, there's several. And there's one that has a Catholic concept, and it's called The Ritual. Maybe you've seen some ads for it. Maybe you've seen it on social media, but it's in the line of these exorcism movies. So lots of people think of The Exorcist, or maybe The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Maybe there's other exorcist movies out there. So this is another movie in that genre. And today I'm happy to be speaking with Father Aaron Williams from Mississippi, who is going to talk a little bit about The Ritual, his role, his involvement with it, and just a little bit more about exorcism. So thanks so much, Father Aaron, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So first of all, tell me, how do you get involved with a movie called The Ritual? They sought you out. They found you.
A little bit. I'm the rector of the Basilica of St. Mary in Natchez, Mississippi. And at the time that The Ritual was preparing to be filmed, there was an actor strike in Hollywood. And so they were looking for different places to film. And there's a small film company here in Natchez that the producer of The Ritual, Andrew Stevens, had known about because he was working on a project in the area with them. And funny enough, the two of them were at dinner at a restaurant here in town, and someone brought up the fact that they were trying to find a place to film this movie, The Ritual. And the guy from Natchez had said, well, we have this beautiful Catholic church here with all this space, and I have the priest's phone number, so why don't I give it to you and you reach out to him? So they called me, and I was originally a little skeptical of the idea because I'm not a big fan of a lot of these exorcism movies. I feel like they don't address the topic in a respectful way normally, and so I was kind of opposed to it originally. But I agreed to meet with them, and they shared me the concept of this movie, and I was very impressed actually at how intentional and reverent and respectful they were trying to be with this script. And so I directed them to speak to our bishop to get his permission, and he agreed. And so I became the host of this originally. But as time progressed, so my field is liturgy. I have a master's in liturgical studies, and I'm pursuing a doctorate right now. And so that's my specialty. I serve in the the board of directors of the Society for Catholic Liturgy, and we publish an academic journal. So either way, so in my conversations with the director and the producer, they started asking me a lot of questions here and there until eventually they asked if I would come on in a fuller capacity as a consultant. So I began to advise in matters of the script. And while they were here, I helped a lot with costumes, with questions with set design, and I was present every day during the filming to observe and provide my commentary. And I blessed the set every morning. So we had a lot of involvement from priest in this. And it was a cool experience for me. I was grateful to be a part of it because like I said, going in, I didn't expect I was going to have that significant of a role. But it was a great opportunity for me. And I think it shows, in good ways, seeing the film.
Yeah, sure. I did notice there were no overlay stoles over a fiddleback or something like that, So
Yeah.
definitely, your expertise there and just telling them, well, this is what a Catholic priest would actually do was probably very helpful in communicating the truth and the ideals of our Catholic faith. So do you have any background then in exorcism or anything like that? Or this was kind of taken on as you hosted it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not an exorcist. It's funny enough, ever since I've been involved with this, I've started to get calls from people who think I'm an exorcist. But I tell people my desire for that job is in the negatives. I have a friend who is, and so I did put them in touch with him for a little bit of conversation. But in pursuing my degrees in liturgy, obviously, when we studied the rite of exorcism, we had a whole class on it, and so I'm familiar with the rite and a lot of the process psychologically a diocese goes through before approving solemn exorcism. So I was able to advise in those matters as well. A lot of my involvement was far more on the characters of these priests and these sisters. Because seeing I didn't tell any people, like, if you watch the trailer, you get the impression that this is just another one of these horror exorcism movies. And I did tell the director, I said, I don't think the trailer does you justice. I think the movie's better than the trailer makes it look out to be. Because when you watch the movie itself, to me, yes, it's the story is around an exorcism that makes up about 20 minutes of the film. But I mean, the majority of the movie, in my opinion, is a lot more about the interior stories of the two priests are involved and the religious sisters are involved, and in many ways, how the church came together to assist this woman in her suffering, and that I think is a story worth telling. More than
Mm.
just sort of this was saying. That's what opened to me the idea of having this film here. Was looking at that deeper picture of how does the church act in this, rather than just making exorcism into another, kind of set piece.
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that impressed me was just sometimes after the exorcism, the Capuchin priest would go in and pray before the Blessed Sacrament in the church, and so you get very much this prayerful dimension of the exorcist himself. And kind of interesting. The movie starts this young priest preacher. He's preaching about the reality of evil, but then he's kind of skeptical about exorcism and the devil and all that. So, kind of an interesting thing there. But I guess I'm curious. So we've mentioned a few of these other exorcist movies, such as um, uh, yeah, such as The Exorcism of Emily Rose or The Exorcist. There are a lot of different books. So Father Gabriel Amorth wrote about exorcisms. Father Stephen Rossetti has been doing a lot. I just saw a press release this morning for a new book on exorcism that he has. There was Father Carlos, who had his Exorcist Files podcast that was super popular. So it seems people are very much attracted to this notion, this reality of exorcisms. Well, why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, to be entirely honest, one of the reasons I think people are attracted to it is not necessarily a spiritually good thing, right? I think people become attracted to exorcism because they see it as something that's neat, and interesting and almost magical. And then that was my original caution to having the film as well, is to priests need to make sure that the faithful understand evil, right, and the problem of evil and what we're up against. But they need to know it in such a way that we don't make evil into something that looks exciting, right? Because that's really the joke, right? I mean, the enemy wants us to think that all of this, that this is where the fun stuff is, right? You're lacking this. I mean, it's the life he gave to Eve. It's, you have everything, but you're still missing something. And so we don't want people to be attracted for that sense. But I do think that's a large reason why people are. Now, on a spiritual level, we're also seeing more causes for solemn exorcism, especially in the United States lately. Uh, and not just for the usual reasons. I mean, I live in an area that has a lot of people who are involved in the occult and voodoo and that kind of thing. But I think nowadays people are dealing with a lot more spiritual sicknesses because you have things like pornography in your phone, right? And it's so easily accessible, and these wounds can fester for so long. And um, so, yeah, I also think on a spiritual level that there's also an interest because we're in a deeper bit of spiritual warfare than we've perhaps been in the past. And that's why the U.S. bishops, I think, published that Prayers Against Darkness booklet that came out a few years ago. Is how can we give people spiritual resources to respond to this real need in a way that's also not making it into a spectacle of some sense,
Yeah, the premise of the movie, it's actually based on a real story, a real exorcism case. Just talk a little bit about the historical basis for the film.
Yeah, so the story it takes place in Iowa in 1928. It's the most well documented American solemn exorcism in history. So the original story is this woman who takes on the pseudonym, Emma. It's not really her name, but it was done for her safety that took on a new name. Um, as a younger girl, I would imagine teenage to college years age. She was dealing with this issue of possession, and the priest in the story, the Capuchin, Father Theophilus, who's an Italian Capuchin, is sent to perform an exorcism and is widely unsuccessful. And in the writings, he gives, it sort of seems to point towards he was unsuccessful because of an issue of his own faith. And so then the diocese acted for years trying to support this woman, and the diocese was largely unsuccessful as well. And people were starting to doubt whether or not there's anything that really could be done. Um, she was eventually relocated to a convent to try to protect herself, but also to keep out of the public eye. And the movie sort of picks up towards the end of the story, because at the end of the story, the local bishop has been communicating with Father Theophilus in Italy, and the decision is made that he will try again for the last time. And so he returned to the United States for this sort of final attempt at exorcism. And so you're entering the story at a moment where Father Theophilus is returning. The local parish priest, Father Steiger, who's played by Dan Stevens in the movie, is dealing with his own interior battles of faith and issues in his own personal family. And then you have these sisters who, have become hosts to this exorcism that they don't want around them, but also have a genuine desire to help this woman. And so you see the movie's telling multiple layers of a really, true story where you're dealing with real people who, have their own problems, and yet they're all coming together for the assistance of this one woman. And I think the movie resolves in a very faithful way. Al Pacino's character of this Capuchin priest, he's the kind of guy that, for those of us who are Catholic and love looking at holy priests, we would recognize him as a holy priest, because he's not kind of putting on airs in the movie, right? He's acting in a saintly fashion, very confident in the mercy of God. So I think the movie does an excellent job at that, and trying to convey a real story in a very respectful way.
So this exorcism is taking place in the first part of the 1900s, right? Like 1920 or
Like
something like that.
1928, yeah.
Yeah, so an exorcism that would be done today, so by a modern exorcist, it would look a little different, I'm assuming. Like you probably wouldn't bring the person to the rectory or have them staying there, or what would it look like today, I guess, if this was a contemporary exorcism?
Yeah, so yes and no to your answer, right? So I mean, obviously the rite of exorcism was reformed, like most of the other rituals of the church, in the early 1970s. However, unlike most other rites within the church, the traditional form of the rite of exorcism has largely remained in use. Very few diocesan exorcists make use of the new rite of exorcism at all, and and most exorcists will tell you that they only ever strictly perform exorcisms in Latin. And that's still the case, in the modern world today. So that's one thing that the movie does take liberties on. Is the movie it's going to give sections of the rite in English, I think, just for people to watch. But historically, and even in the modern period, exorcisms are usually only entirely performed in Latin. Um, of course, there's a lot of regulations that surround exorcisms nowadays. So before one can occur, right, all solemn exorcisms have to have the permission of a bishop. And the way that permission is gained, right, is there has to be a process canonically that's gone through to determine that there's no other cause for this person's situation, right? There's no medical cause, there's no psychological cause. And so professionals have to be utilized in that, right? You can't just say, well, we don't think it's a medical reason. Like a doctor has to demonstrate there's no medical reason, and a psychologist has to demonstrate there's no psychological reason before a bishop can give permission for a solemn exorcism to occur. And at that point, it's left in the hands of the diocesan exorcist or the bishop himself. He's able to do it if he would like to. And generally speaking, the diocesan exorcist will work with a team. Usually, the team consists of some members of the laity and some priests. Someone within the team keeps records, which are kept in a confidential archive of the diocese, which we see play out in the movie. Father Steiger is the parish priest, and that's really his job in the movie, is he's the one who's recording what's happening. Um, Typically speaking, exorcisms nowadays they're usually performed in a sacred place. So they might bring the person to a church or that kind of thing. They're not typically, it's not like visiting the sick the way we do for like communion calls. Typically, exorcisms are planned out, and usually once they begin, they don't cease until they're over. Um, so they, like I said, typically they will occur in a sacred space here. And the movie, I don't know if they convey it very clearly just because of time constraints, but so the woman isn't brought to the rectory of the church. She's brought to the convent, and she's staying in the infirmary of the sisters' convent. And so that's where the exorcisms are taking place in the movie. That answer your question to some extent?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it just kind of gives us, that greater context, just what it looks like, things like that. Because I was just wondering myself as I was watching it, I'm like, I just wonder if this is how it really happens today. Obviously, I've not been a part of an exorcism or anything like that either. So, yeah, I just had those questions myself too. So, yeah, so being a part of it, hosting it, being involved, do you recommend people to go see it, or who should go see it? Do you caution some people in seeing it? What's your whole take on that?
Yeah. So when they sent me the final copy, and I'll admit I was nervous to watch it because I didn't want to watch it. It did feel like I regretted doing this. But when I watched it, I was very happy with it. I think it's one of the best expressions of sort of an authentic look at the church and on screen I've seen. Right. You don't see a lot of movies where you have priests who are obviously struggling but don't turn out to be just these horrible people. Usually the priests on television are always like the drunks, that kind of thing, right? And so it's nice to see them tell a story of a priest who is struggling, but is struggling in an authentic and priestly way, right? And is wanting to be a good priest. I appreciate that. So, and obviously, right. So the movie's rated R because there are thematic elements that can be scary, especially if you're on kids. There's nothing in the film, that's overly sexualized or that kind of thing. So in that respect, right, the film is not branching into those things. I do think if parents are going to bring, youth and children to it, it's important that they be told, one, that we're dealing with something that is real, right? This isn't going like to watch Harry Potter, right? We're going to go watch something that actually happened in the history of the church and happened in the United States, and it's something that we don't need to be afraid of, but we should know about. I think that's the kind of preparation that parents need to give their kids, because kids need to know the truth, but they need to be taught the truth in a way that isn't going to get them to start, wanting to dress up like exorcists for Halloween or that sort of thing.
Yeah. Do you know what happened to Emma after the exorcism? So the exorcism was successful. Does she go on to live a normal, happy, healthy, holy life?
That I don't know the answer to. There's a lot of resources on the Rituals website. So if you look up the Ritual movie on Google and go to the website, they have a full page with information about this particular exorcism, with exorcisms themselves. They even have links to the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. about their own regulations for exorcism and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of resources if people want to go there to learn more about the story.
Yeah, so all in all, it seems like a movie respects the Catholic Church, provides a good perspective on it, and introduces us to this reality of exorcisms. And, when we have exorcism, I think it tells us, as you've said, this is real. This is the battle between good and evil. So if there's evil, it also points us to the reality of faith and a God who loves all people. So, yeah, well, thanks so much, Father Aaron, for sharing just a little bit of your own insight and your own experience with the film.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you liked today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. And don't forget to stay up to date with what Father Edward is doing by following him on Facebook, X, or Instagram at the handle @FREdwardLooney. Thanks for listening, and please join Father Edward again next time for another inspiring conversation.